I spent 6 hours baking that pie. It wasn't just any pie, it was Hannah's favorite, pear and almond, the one I used to make every summer when she was little. She'd sit on the kitchen counter with her feet swinging, begging to lick the bowl, giggling whenever flour puffed into the air. "Grandma, this is the best pie in the whole world," she used to say. That's what I remembered as I sliced the pears thin, soaking them in lemon water just the way she liked. My hands ached from kneading the crust, but I didn't mind. I wanted it perfect. She hadn't come to visit in months, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be a nice surprise. Something to remind her of our bond. Something to bring us a little closer again. The drive was long, but my heart was light. I wrapped the pie in a clean towel to keep it warm. Every red light felt like it lasted forever. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw me at the door, holding that pie like a gift from the past. Maybe she'd hug me. Maybe she'd even cry a little, the way I sometimes did when I missed her too much. But I didn't get to the door. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her through the window. She was in the kitchen with two of her friends. They were laughing about something. I parked quietly and walked up the path. I was just about to knock when I heard her voice, loud and clear. "This is disgusting," she said, holding up a slice of the pie. I froze. She dumped it into the dog's bowl. The dog sniffed it, then wandered off like it wasn't worth the trouble. Her friends burst out laughing. She kept going. "My grandma made it. She still uses actual butter and stuff. So gross. Who even eats this anymore?" I just stood there. She hadn't seen me. None of them had. I was a ghost on the other side of the glass, holding that empty space between what was and what is. I looked down at my hands, still warm from the oven, still dusted with flour. I couldn't feel my fingers. My face felt hot and cold at the same time. My eyes stung, but I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. I turned around, walked back to the car, quietly. No one noticed. I placed the towel gently over the empty pie tin on the passenger seat. Then I put the car in reverse, backed out of that driveway, and drove the 40 minutes home in complete silence. That night, I pulled out my old will from the file cabinet in the hallway closet. And I changed it. No anger, no phone call, no note, just a signature, a quiet shift in paper and power. I had given everything, my time, my energy, my heart, to people who no longer saw value in what I had to offer. And in that moment, I stopped offering. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before any of this, my life had a gentle rhythm. I lived in a modest, single-story home with sun-faded shutters and creaky floors that had known generations of laughter. After my husband, Raymond, passed away 8 years ago, the house got quieter, but it never felt empty. That was because of Hannah. I adored my granddaughter. From the time she was born, I made her the center of my world. Nicole, my daughter, had Hannah when she was 24, just as her corporate career was taking off. She needed help, and I offered, gladly. I watched Hannah while Nicole traveled for conferences, sat beside her crib when she had night terrors, made her lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside. I was more than a grandmother. I was her safe place. Hannah and I had our traditions. Every summer, she'd stay with me for 2 weeks. We'd bake pies, paint our toenails on the porch, and watch old musicals in pajamas. She'd fall asleep with her head in my lap, and I'd sit there long after the movie ended, stroking her hair, whispering prayers of gratitude. Back then, she called me Mimi. She gave me that name when she was 2 and couldn't say grandma. It stuck. Everyone in the neighborhood knew me as Mimi. Even the mailman. Nicole was always busy, but she appreciated me. At least, I thought she did. She used to say, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom." But over time, the tone changed. It went from gratitude to expectation. I was expected to be available, to babysit, to drive, to pay. Still, I never minded. What I lacked in money, I made up for in love. When Hannah turned 13, I threw her a backyard party. I strung up lights, made her favorite sliders, and even got a bounce house. Though I knew she was too old for it. She laughed and hugged me, whispering, "You're the coolest, Mimi." That moment stayed with me. I clung to it in the years that followed, when things began to shift. By the time she was 15, her summers with me shortened. First it was 2 weeks, then just one, then a few days squeezed between camps and other plans. She started showing up late, always glued to her phone, responding to my questions with mumbles. Nicole brushed it off. "Teenagers," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "Don't take it personally." But I did. Of course I did. Still, I tried. Every time Hannah came over, I made her favorite meals. I'd light candles and play jazz on the record player, hoping she'd feel the same warmth I did. Some nights, she'd smile. Other nights, she'd vanish into the guest room and close the door. I kept baking, though. Always the pear and almond pie. She used to beg me for it when she was younger. She'd say, "Mimi, your pie is magic." So I never stopped making it, even when she stopped asking. There was a comfort in that routine. It made me feel connected to something real, something lasting. I imagined that one day she'd be older and she'd come back around. That's how it works, right? Kids wander, then they return home. That's what I believed. Even the last time I saw her before the pie incident, I had hope. She had just turned 17. I saw her at Nicole's for a quick birthday dinner. I brought her a locket. Inside was a tiny photo of the two of us at the county fair when she was 7. She smiled, said thanks, then went right back to scrolling on her phone. Nicole barely looked up from her laptop. I remember standing in that kitchen holding a dish towel, realizing that my words didn't land the way they used to. My voice didn't echo anymore in their world, but I didn't want to admit that. So I went home that night, lit a candle in the kitchen, and pulled out the pie dish. I told myself next time would be better, that maybe if I just showed up with the right kind of love, it would all click back into place. I didn't realize then that love, when it's taken for granted long enough, starts to look invisible. But I still had hope. That's the cruel part. Hope keeps you cooking pies for people who've already thrown them away in their minds. The first real sign that something had shifted, something more than just teenage mood swings or modern manners, came one fall afternoon, almost a year before the pie. It was a crisp Sunday in late October. I had just finished knitting Hannah a thick burgundy scarf for the upcoming winter. She'd mentioned the color once, in passing, while scrolling through photos of some influencer wearing an oversized knit at a pumpkin patch. I wrote it down in my little notepad where I keep birthdays, grocery lists, and tiny scraps of memory I'm afraid to lose. I spent a week making that scarf. My joints ached from the repetitive motion, but every stitch was filled with purpose. I wrapped it with care, tucked a little handwritten card inside that read, "Stay warm, sweetheart, love Mimi," and drove it over to Nicole's house. I didn't call ahead. I thought it would be a nice surprise. When I knocked, Nicole answered the door wearing yoga pants and wireless earbuds. She smiled half-heartedly, pulling one earbud out. "Hey, Mom, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said. "Just dropping something off for Hannah." I held out the package like an offering. Nicole took it with a quick glance. "Oh, nice," she said. "She's upstairs doing homework, but I'll give it to her. I don't mind waiting, just a minute." Nicole hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure, okay." I stood in the entryway for a while, taking in the smell of air-fried chicken and lavender cleaning spray. Photos lined the walls, family vacations, birthday parties, but none with me in them. I noticed that for the first time. Hannah finally came downstairs, wearing leggings, a hoodie, and that same distracted look she'd perfected in the last 2 years. She had her phone in one hand and an iced coffee in the other. She glanced at the package in Nicole's hands. "What's that?" she asked. "It's from Mimi," Nicole said, handing it over. Hannah tore it open. She pulled the scarf out and stared at it for a second. "Oh," she said flatly. "Cool." There was no smile, no hug, not even a thank you. I forced a gentle smile. "I remembered you liked this color." She gave me a sideways glance and said, "Yeah, it's fine, just kinda itchy." Then she placed it on the banister and went back upstairs. Nicole didn't say anything. She just leaned against the wall, checking her smartwatch. I stood there, holding onto a silence that grew heavier by the second. "She's got a lot going on," Nicole finally said, not looking at me. "School's stressful, and she's just not into, handmade stuff." Handmade stuff. I nodded, pressing my lips together. Well, I'll get going then, I said, adjusting my purse strap. Nicole walked me to the door and gave me a quick pat on the shoulder. Thanks, Mom, you're sweet. Sweet. Like a dog that's outlived its useful. When I got into the car, I sat there with the engine off for a few minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly I felt cold. Not from the weather, but from that hollow ache in your chest when you start to wonder if you've become extra. Not necessary, decorative. That scarf sat on the banister for weeks. I saw it still there a month later when I came by to drop off a casserole after Nicole caught the flu. Same spot, still folded, still untouched. I remember Hannah passing by it on her way out the door that day. She didn't even glance at it. She just called out, "Bye, Mom," to Nicole and slammed the door behind her. That was the first moment I realized she wasn't just pulling away, she was detaching. Not all at once, not in a scream or a fight, but in 1,000 small ways. The lack of eye contact, the short replies, the indifference to effort, and I made excuses for every one of them. She's just busy. She's still growing. She'll come around. But that day, sitting in the driver's seat with my scarf rejected like a forgotten relic, something in me flickered, a tiny warning light. It didn't stay on long. I pushed it aside, but it was the first red flag, and I should have paid more attention. You don't notice it all at once. That's the cruel thing about it. Emotional erosion doesn't come like a thunderstorm. It's not one big argument or a slammed door. It's the steady drip of small indifferences, quiet neglect, the slow realization that the warmth you poured into someone no longer reflects back. It's being in the same room with someone you love and feeling like furniture. It started happening more after the scarf. Hannah no longer called me Mimi. That name, so full of love and childhood, was replaced with Grandma, said in a flat, distant tone, when she remembered to speak to me at all. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to sound needy. I just smiled and answered her, pretending it didn't pierce. That Christmas, I invited Nicole and Hannah over for dinner. I cooked all their favorites: glazed ham, sweet potato casserole, fresh rolls, and of course, pear and almond pie. I even set the table with the old holiday china Nicole used to love as a child. They showed up an hour late. Hannah barely looked up from her phone. Nicole spent most of the evening checking work emails and muttering about deadlines. When I tried to start a conversation, about anything really, it fizzled before it began. I asked Hannah about school. "It's fine," she said. I asked Nicole how work was going. "Busy." I asked if they wanted to watch White Christmas like we used to. "We'll pass," Nicole said. "We've seen it 1,000 times." When dinner was finally served, I proudly placed the pie in the center of the table. Hannah barely glanced at it. She took a slice, pushed it around her plate with a fork, then left most of it untouched. They left early that night. No one took leftovers. As I stood by the door watching their taillights disappear, I realized I hadn't received a single thank you. Not for the meal, not for the gifts, not for anything. I cried after they left. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears over a sink full of dishes. I wasn't heartbroken. Not yet. I was confused and tired. In the weeks that followed, the distance grew wider. Nicole stopped calling altogether. Texts became transactional. "Can you pick up Hannah on Thursday?" Or, "She left a charger at your house." No. "How are you, Mom?" No. "Love you." When I tried to call just to talk, the phone would ring and go to voicemail. Sometimes I'd get a text hours later. "Sorry, can't talk. Super swamped." One afternoon, I dropped off a care package for Hannah. Just small things. Her favorite tea, a new notebook for school, a little hand-knit pouch I'd made. I left it on their porch with a note that said, "Thinking of you." I never got a reply. A week later, I saw Hannah post on social media a photo of her holding a $10 latte captioned, "Self-care is real love." Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments. That's the part that stung. Watching her pour affection out online for brands and friends and strangers, while I sat there wondering if I had become invisible in her world. Then there were the birthdays. That year, they forgot mine. Not just forgot a card or a call. They forgot altogether. No message, no visit, not even a belated text. I sat at the kitchen table that morning with a slice of pie I'd made for myself, a candle flickering silently in the middle. No singing, no laughter, just me. I told myself not to be dramatic. People get busy, life happens. But the truth settled deep in my chest. They didn't forget. They just didn't remember in a way that meant anything. And slowly, I stopped trying. I stopped sending reminders. I stopped double texting. I stopped baking just in case they came over. The fridge no longer held their favorites. The guest room remained untouched. And still, they didn't notice. I had become a habit they no longer needed, a background character in their story. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something in me was dimming, and I didn't know how to relight it. It was a warm Saturday in late spring when it happened. The kind of day where everything should feel easy and light. The sun was out, the trees had bloomed, and the world smelled like fresh grass and early flowers. I had woken up early and baked lemon muffins. I wrapped half in foil for the freezer and packed the rest in a basket, lined with a gingham cloth. I was on my way to drop them off for Hannah. Nicole had texted the night before. "Hannah's got a group project, maybe drop off snacks?" She didn't say thank you. Still, I didn't mind. I was glad to be asked for something. Glad to feel useful again. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw 3 cars parked out front. I could hear music coming from inside. Teenagers laughing. The back gate was wide open, so I let myself in, the way I always used to. The backyard looked like something out of a catalog. String lights, beanbag chairs, a fold-out projector screen showing a muted movie. Hannah was there with 3 girls and 2 boys, all huddled around the patio table, eating chips and scrolling on their phones. I cleared my throat gently. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "I brought muffins." Heads turned, a few polite smiles, a few blank stares. Hannah looked up from her phone and blinked. "Oh," she said, "you didn't have to come back here." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was cold. Public. I held up the basket, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your mom said you might want something to snack on." One of her friends giggled. Another leaned in and said something I couldn't hear. Hannah let out a laugh, short and sharp. "Guys," she said with a little smirk, "my grandma still bakes everything, like from scratch. She's totally obsessed with old recipes and stuff." Someone whispered, "That's kind of cute." Hannah shrugged. "It's like her whole personality." They laughed again. Not loudly, but enough. I stood there with the basket in my hands, every second stretching longer than it should. No one offered to take it. No one said thank you. I placed it gently on the corner of the table. "Well," I said, my voice quieter now, "they're still warm." As I turned to go, I heard one of the boys ask, "Wait, what even is a lemon muffin?" Hannah answered, "It's like some boomer pastry." More laughter. I walked away as casually as I could, refusing to let my back slump. My heart was thudding, but my face didn't crack. Not yet. When I got to the car, I sat behind the wheel and stared at my hands. They were trembling slightly, wrinkled, veined. Those same hands had buttoned her coat when she was 5, had held her hair back when she threw up during the flu, had painted her nails with glitter polish before her middle school dance. Now they were the punchline to a joke I wasn't supposed to hear. I didn't cry, not then. I turned on the radio and drove home in silence. Later that night, I went to check if Nicole had texted. Maybe a thank you, maybe an apology. Nothing, just an old forwarded message about a discount on running shoes. I sat at the kitchen table, looked at the muffins I had saved for myself, and wondered when I became someone to be embarrassed by. When did the love I had poured into them become quaint? When did tradition become cringeworthy? I had always known I wasn't part of their world, the high-speed, screen-filled, endlessly curated world they lived in. But I thought I still mattered. I thought I still held a place in her heart that couldn't be swept away by sarcasm and social media. That night, something in me shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was shame. A slow burning humiliation that curled up in my chest like smoke and stayed there. And for the first time, I started asking myself if I truly belonged in their lives anymore, or if I was just hanging on to something that had already let go of me. They hadn't pushed me out, not with their hands, but with silence, with jokes, with the kind of laughter that makes you feel like an antique, collecting dust in the corner of a room no one visits anymore. That kind of laughter leaves bruises no one sees, and I felt every single one. After the backyard incident, I stopped dropping by unannounced. I stopped bringing baked goods or care packages. I even stopped texting as much. Not out of spite, but because I finally started to understand something. I was no longer wanted in the way I used to be. My presence had become optional, even uncomfortable. Nicole didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't mention it. A few weeks later, she called. Not to ask how I was, but to say, "We're keeping it small this year, maybe just the three of us for Mother's Day." I paused. "You mean I shouldn't come?" There was a silence. I could hear her typing in the background, probably answering emails while I sat there trying to breathe through the ache in my throat. "It's not that we don't want you there," she finally said. "It's just, you always want things a certain way, and Hannah's been stressed. I think it's better this year if we just relax and do something low-key." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply said, "Of course. That makes sense." And just like that, I was erased from a holiday that was meant to honor people like me. The next day, I went to the grocery store and bought a single white rose. I came home, placed it in a vase on the kitchen table, and made myself a simple dinner. Scrambled eggs and toast. No candles, no special recipes. Just silence and the hum of the refrigerator. I turned on the television for company, but the noise felt empty. I turned it off and sat in the dark for a long time. The clock ticked loudly, each second like a small reminder. This is your new life now. The world had moved on, and I had not. That night, I opened the closet in the guest room. Inside were some of Hannah's old things: a teddy bear she used to sleep with, a pair of glittery shoes from when she was 6, a box of crayon drawings she once made just for me. I sat on the floor and looked through them one by one. There was one drawing I hadn't seen in years. A simple crayon sketch of a big yellow sun, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, and 2 stick figures standing hand in hand. Above them, in messy handwriting, it read, "Me and Mimi. I love her the most." I held it to my chest and felt my breath catch. Where had that little girl gone? Where had I gone? The next morning, I folded the drawing back into the box, closed the closet door, and made a quiet decision. I would stop trying to fit into a space that had clearly changed shape without me. I didn't announce anything. I didn't make a scene. I didn't call Nicole or send any dramatic message. I just stopped. I stopped initiating contact, stopped offering help, stopped volunteering myself for birthdays, rides, dinners, or holidays. I let the silence settle between us, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And in that silence, I found something unexpected: peace. Not the joyful kind, not yet, but the kind that comes from finally understanding your place in someone's story and realizing you're not on the main page anymore. A few weeks passed, then a month. No one called. No one asked if I was okay. At first, it hurt more than I can say. I kept checking my phone out of habit. I waited for a knock that never came. But slowly, that ache dulled. The silence became a cushion instead of a wound. I started filling my days differently, cleaning out closets, rearranging bookshelves, going for longer walks. I stopped baking. I couldn't bring myself to pull out the measuring cups or the pie tin. It felt too much like hope, too much like reaching out a hand that had already been slapped away. One morning, while trimming the front hedges, my neighbor Barbara waved and asked if everything was all right. I told her the truth. "I think I'm learning how to be alone again." She nodded. Sometimes, that's when we figure out who we really are. That stayed with me. It wasn't that I had been pushed out with cruelty or anger. It was worse than that. I had simply become irrelevant. And rather than wait to be noticed again, I chose to walk away. Quietly, with dignity. Not because I wanted to leave them behind, but because I finally realized they had already moved on. They just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. So I did it for them. I didn't know I had reached rock bottom until I was already sitting in it. There's no grand collapse when it happens. No crashing of glass or shouting or final goodbye. Just a long, slow sinking. Like your feet are stuck in wet cement and the world keeps moving around you. Faster, louder, colder. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind that used to feel busy with purpose. I'd wake early, prepare breakfast, maybe run errands or prep something for Nicole and Hannah. But that day, I stayed in bed until almost noon. I didn't hear the birds chirping, didn't care that the mail was late. The sun filtered through the curtains like it was visiting someone else. I finally dragged myself up and shuffled to the kitchen in my robe. The tile felt cold against my feet, and the coffee I brewed tasted like nothing. I sat at the table staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Raymond used to fill. I imagined him there, reading the paper, smiling at me with that quiet steadiness he always had. The ghost of his presence filled the silence, and that only made it worse. It had been months since I'd seen Hannah, even longer since she looked me in the eyes. The holidays had passed without an invitation. My birthday had come and gone without so much as a text. And Nicole, well, she was busy as always. "I'll call you this weekend," she said in a message one Friday. The weekend passed, then the next. She never called. I used to talk to people about it. Barbara next door, the woman at the checkout lane. But I stopped. I got tired of hearing things like, teenagers grow out of it, or she'll come around. It felt like I was being told to wait in a room with no doors, hoping someone would remember I existed. One night, after another dinner eaten alone, I walked into the spare room where I kept Hannah's old belongings. I hadn't touched it since I folded away the crayon drawings and shoes, but something in me needed to see it again. I opened the closet and found the small box of keepsakes, birthday cards, school photos, and a music box she once gave me for Christmas. When I opened the lid, the tiny ballerina inside spun slowly to a song that barely played anymore, warped by time and dust. I watched it twirl with tears in my eyes, not from nostalgia, but from the crushing realization that I had built a life around people who had outgrown me. I slept poorly that night, dreams haunted by scenes that never happened. Hannah running into my arms, Nicole apologizing, family dinners where laughter returned, but I woke to the same silence, the same cold space where love used to live. That morning, I went to the grocery store, not because I needed anything, but because I needed people. I wandered the aisles slowly, dragging my cart with no list, no direction. I passed mothers with toddlers, teenagers grabbing snacks, couples debating over pasta brands. And I realized I wasn't part of any of those worlds anymore. I was a passerby, a shadow moving through their stories. At checkout, the young clerk said, "You doing all right today, ma'am?" It was such a simple question, and I almost cried, but I just nodded and said, "Yes, dear." "Thank you. I came home, sat in the driveway for a long time, and wondered how many years I had left. Not in a dramatic way, just mathematically, realistically. I had spent over 60 years pouring love into others, into Nicole, into Hannah, into Raymond. And now, with most of them either gone or distant, I was left with all this love and nowhere to put it. That's what rock bottom is. Not screaming or desperation. It's silence. It's watching a pie crust you didn't finish making slowly dry out on the counter and not having the energy to throw it away. It's listening to your phone not ring. It's forgetting the last time you were hugged without obligation. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. I looked at my face, the lines around my eyes, the sag of my cheeks, the gray in my hair. I searched for something familiar, someone strong, someone worthy. But all I saw was a woman who had spent her whole life being dependable and now didn't know what to depend on. I turned off the light and went to bed early. I didn't pray that night. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and thought, if this is what's left, how do I start again? I didn't know the answer yet. but something deep inside me whispered that I still had time to find out. It was a rainy Thursday morning when I found it. I had no plans that day. The weather was gray and unforgiving, and the wind scraped against the house like it was trying to remind me I was alone. I moved from room to room, wiping already clean counters and folding linens that didn't need folding. Anything to keep myself busy. Anything to keep from sinking too far into the quiet. Eventually, I wandered into the spare room, the one that used to be Hannah's. I rarely went in there anymore. The door stayed shut most of the time. It felt like a museum of memories I wasn't strong enough to dust. But something that morning pulled me in. Maybe it was the sound of the rain. Maybe it was that tiny ember inside me still looking for meaning, still hoping something, anything, would remind me I mattered. I opened the closet and began going through the shelves. Old notebooks, board games we used to play, faded children's books with corners chewed by time. I came across a stack of papers tied with ribbon, report cards, artwork. One page caught my eye, a poem, hand-printed in a child's uneven lettering. It was titled, My Mimi. I sat down on the bed and began reading. My Mimi smells like cookies and hugs that don't let go. She laughs when I wear her shoes and makes the best cocoa. My eyes blurred before I reached the second stanza. She holds my hand when I'm scared and sings songs when I'm sick. She tells me I'm brave and kind and loves me more than quick. That last line made no grammatical sense, but I remembered it. She wrote that when she was 8. I had it pinned to the fridge for years. At some point, I tucked it away for safekeeping, and now here it was again, staring back at me like a voice from a different world. I held the poem to my chest, my heart pounding harder than it had in weeks. It wasn't just a child's scribble. It was proof that I had been important once, loved, needed. For a moment, I let myself feel it again, that pure connection. The way she used to wrap her arms around my neck and whisper, "You're my best friend." The way her face would light up when she saw me waiting at the school pickup line. The way she used to fall asleep beside me on the couch, trusting me to be there when she woke. I wiped my tears, carefully folded the poem and placed it on the nightstand. Then I noticed the cardboard box under the bed. I hadn't opened it in years. It was sealed with old packing tape, the kind that curls at the edges. I pulled it out, sliced it open, and found a pile of documents. Bank statements, retirement plans, my original will. I didn't know why I started flipping through it. Maybe I just needed something to ground me. But a few pages in, I saw something I hadn't remembered putting there. A letter, my handwriting, dated 7 years ago. It was addressed to Nicole. I unfolded it, surprised by the steadiness of my own writing. Dear Nicole, if you're reading this, something has happened, and I hope you remember who I was, not just what I did. I wasn't perfect, but everything I ever gave, I gave out of love. This home, these recipes, the late-night rides, the school pickups, the endless favors, none of it was out of duty. It was all because I adored you. And I adored Hannah. My life was never big or flashy, but it was full because of you two. Please remind her that Mimi loved her more than anything in the world. No matter where I end up, that part will always be true. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking too hard. I had forgotten I wrote that. Forgotten that there was a time I felt so certain about my place in their hearts that I wanted to leave something behind, something loving, something final. But now, sitting in the wreckage of that certainty, something inside me sparked. That letter, that poem, they were fragments of a woman who had mattered, who had loved without conditions. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I felt real, and I realized something important. My love had not been the problem. My heart hadn't failed. They had simply stopped seeing it, and I had stopped seeing myself. But not anymore. I sat up straighter, folded the poem and the letter gently like sacred artifacts, placed them in a fresh envelope, not to send, just to keep close, as reminders, as proof. I wasn't done. I had more to say, more to be. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the discovery I needed to start rewriting it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, something I hadn't done in months. Not out of restlessness or sadness, but because I wanted to. That alone felt strange, liberating. My body moved with purpose, even if the world outside hadn't changed. I brewed coffee, not out of habit, but because I wanted to taste it again. I stood by the window and watched the first hint of light stretch across the sky. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a canvas. I thought about the letter I found, the poem. I thought about the way Hannah used to run to me with her arms wide open and how fiercely she once believed in me. That little girl was still in there somewhere, maybe buried beneath teenage pride and distance. But the love we shared had been real, and it wasn't gone. It was just mine now. Something I didn't have to give away to feel worthy. That thought settled into me like warmth returning to frozen fingers. Later that day, I pulled out a fresh notebook from my desk drawer. It was one I'd bought years ago at a bookstore with Hannah. It still had the sticker on the back. I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote on the first page, "What I've learned," and I just began. Not for anyone else, not to hand off to Nicole or to try and teach Hannah a lesson. This was for me, a reclamation of voice, a way to remind myself that my life was still mine. I wrote about being young and scared the day Nicole was born, about Raymond teaching me how to dance in the living room, about the first time Hannah said Mimi and how I cried in the car afterward because I had never felt so seen. I wrote about grief, about loneliness, but also about joy. By the third page, my hand hurt, but my heart didn't. Later that week, I went out and bought a small rosemary plant. Not flowers, they die too quickly, but something I could nurture. I placed it on the windowsill above the sink. It was silly, but I liked the way it made the kitchen smell. Clean, fresh, alive. On Friday, I walked into the local library and signed up to volunteer. The woman behind the desk looked surprised. Most people my age didn't come in asking for shifts, but she smiled and handed me a form. "We could use more people in the children's section," she said. "They love a good storytime voice." That made me laugh. "Well, I've been telling bedtime stories for 30 years, I told her. I might still have a few good ones left. It felt good to hear myself say that. Like I was reminding the world, and myself, that I hadn't run dry. Over the next few days, I started organizing my recipes, not because anyone asked for them, but because they mattered. They were part of me. I labeled each one neatly, writing notes in the margins. Who loved which pie, what not to skip, the little tricks that made them mine. I thought about Hannah again. I didn't push her out of my mind, and I let her be there, quietly. But I no longer waited for the phone to ring. I no longer checked social media hoping to see a post about missing me. I stopped needing to be remembered to know I was real. One morning, while watering the rosemary plant, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked, not younger, not stronger, but different, present, awake. That's when I knew something had changed. It wasn't a lightning strike, no dramatic makeover, no speech. Just a shift inside of me that said, "You are allowed to be more than what they left behind." I still missed them. Of course I did. I missed Hannah's voice calling me Mimi. I missed the way Nicole used to lean her head on my shoulder when she was exhausted. But I also began to realize that love, real love, doesn't mean staying in a place where you're not valued. You can miss someone and still walk away. You can carry the good and release the rest. And you can reclaim yourself without anyone else's permission. That was my awakening, not a loud roar, just a quiet breath that finally didn't hurt. Once the fog in my chest began to clear, I didn't make announcements. I didn't send dramatic letters or declare, "I'm doing things differently now." I simply began, quietly and entirely for myself. It started with small choices that had nothing to do with Nicole or Hannah. The kinds of things that once seemed trivial, but now felt like little rebellions against the invisible life I'd shrunk into. I unsubscribed from the newsletters Nicole had signed me up for years ago. Things like meal kits, trendy fashion blogs, investment advice I never asked for. They'd made me feel like a project in need of upgrading. I didn't need upgrades, I needed peace. I cleared out my closet, not in a frenzy, not as some metaphor for rebirth. Just slow, intentional sorting. I donated the clothes I'd kept just in case. Nicole wanted to borrow them again. That hadn't happened in years. I folded them, thanked them for what they once meant, and let them go. In their place, I kept the clothes that made me feel most like myself. Soft sweaters, long skirts, the cardigan Raymond once said made my eyes look greener. My home changed too. It became less of a shrine to maybe someday, and more of a sanctuary for right now. I took down the photos that made my chest tighten, the ones where I was clearly present but emotionally absent. In their place, I put up older pictures, me and Raymond dancing in the kitchen, Nicole as a little girl on my hip, both of us laughing at something forgotten. A photo Hannah took when she was 9. Me asleep on the porch swing, her shadow in the corner of the frame. That was the last time she saw me without needing anything from me. I kept those images close. Then came the legal things. One afternoon, I sat down with my lawyer. He was a patient man who had helped us with Raymond's estate years ago. I hadn't seen him since then, but when I walked in, he recognized me instantly. "What brings you in today, Mrs. Tate?" he asked. I placed the old copy of my will on his desk. "It's time to make some changes." He blinked. "All right," he said carefully. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" I took a breath. "I'd like to remove Nicole and Hannah as beneficiaries." He hesitated, pen in hand. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said calmly. "They're not part of my life anymore. Not really. I want my money and my home to go to people who show up, who care, even if they're strangers today." So we rewrote it. I left a portion to the local literacy foundation, where I'd begun volunteering in the children's reading corner twice a week. I donated a chunk to the women's shelter a few towns over, the same one that had helped my sister back when we were kids. And the house? I left that to Barbara, my neighbor and now dear friend, whose daughter and 2 grandsons lived in a cramped apartment with peeling walls. Not a soul knew I was doing it. I didn't tell Nicole. I didn't leave clues for Hannah. There were no cryptic social media posts or passive-aggressive hints. I just signed the papers. The weight that lifted from my chest was almost disorienting. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my armchair, the fire flickering low. I opened the same notebook I had started the week before and added a new entry. Today, I chose myself. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I am no one's backup plan. I am no one's duty. I'm not a lesson to be learned too late. I am a woman who loved fully and who is learning to love herself back. I underlined that last sentence 3 times. As the days went on, the world outside carried on like it always had. Cars passing by, kids riding bikes, mail dropped off without fanfare. But inside my house, something new had taken root. Not revenge, not anger, but resolve. I began baking again, not for others, but for myself. One night, I made the pear and almond pie, the same one that had once been thrown to the dog, and ate a slice on the porch with a book in my lap. It wasn't about nostalgia anymore. It was about reclaiming something I loved that had been twisted into shame. There was no audience, no applause, but there was peace. And in that silence, I was rebuilding something more important than a relationship or a family legacy. I was rebuilding my place in the world, on my own terms. It didn't happen with a bang. Power doesn't always shift in fireworks and showdowns. Sometimes it's in the quiet refusal to chase people who stop turning around. And that's exactly what started to unfold. After I changed my will and reshaped my home, I began showing up in the world differently. Not louder, but firmer. I no longer hesitated when someone asked how I was. I stopped softening my sadness for the comfort of others. And more importantly, I stopped waiting. Waiting for apologies, for invitations, for acknowledgement. That shift didn't go unnoticed, not by those who knew me, and especially not by those who didn't expect me to stand so tall again. It started small. Barbara, my neighbor, dropped by one morning with a Tupperware of her famous cinnamon rolls. "I don't know what's going on with you, Marlene," she said, "but something about you feels steadier." I smiled, not explaining, just accepting the compliment. She didn't need to know every detail to feel it. There was a calmness in my voice, in the way I moved around my kitchen, like someone who'd stopped asking for permission to belong. A week later, I received a card from the library's director, thanking me for my work with the children's reading hour. "Your warmth makes a difference," she wrote. I hadn't expected it, but I pressed that card into the pages of my notebook like a flower I didn't want to forget. Meanwhile, Nicole texted, after nearly 2 months of silence. "Hey, Mom, haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a long time. There was no warmth in it, no genuine curiosity, just the guilt-flavored kind of concern that comes when someone finally realizes the person they've taken for granted has gone quiet. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. The next day, she sent another message. "Hannah's been asking if you're mad. She mentioned something about the pie thing. I don't know. Teenagers say dumb things. You know how it is." I almost laughed. After all this time, this was what they reached for, dismissing it as just teenagers being dumb? As if I had imagined the humiliation. As if feeding a pie to a dog and calling it disgusting was some cute hormonal blip. But the difference now was, I didn't need them to understand. Their inability to name what they did wasn't mine to carry anymore. I responded later that night, simple and direct. "I'm okay. I've been focusing on my own life lately. Hope you both are well." She replied with a thumbs up emoji. I left it at that. A few days later, Hannah posted a photo of us. An old one, clearly pulled from Nicole's archives. It was me holding her at age 5. Both of us covered in flour and smiling like the world couldn't touch us. The caption read, "Miss my Mimi sometimes." It was vague, performative, not a message to me, but a curated display for her followers, the kind that wants credit for feeling something without doing anything about it. I didn't comment, I didn't like the post, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about that, because I had stopped living on their timeline. I no longer needed crumbs of connection. I had sat at their table for years and left full of emptiness. Now I was learning how to cook for myself, in every sense of the word. The most powerful part of it all? They started to feel my absence. Barbara mentioned one day that Nicole had stopped her outside and asked if everything was okay with me. "She seemed a little off balance," Barbara said with a chuckle, "like she expected you to still be sitting by the phone." I nodded. "That's the thing about habits," I told her. "They don't know what to do when you break them." Power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from silence, from boundaries, from no longer chasing the version of yourself someone else preferred. I had become quiet, yes, but not invisible. And they were beginning to realize that the things I used to give, the care packages, the baked goods, the invitations, the unshakable loyalty, weren't guaranteed. They were gifts, and I had stopped giving them away to people who didn't know how to hold them. That was the shift. Not vengeance, not bitterness, just knowing my worth, and no longer apologizing for it. It was early autumn when Nicole invited me to brunch. The text arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. "Hey, Mom, want to get brunch this weekend? Just us. Haven't caught up in a while." I stared at the screen. Something about the phrasing felt off. No warmth, but not cold either, just calculated. I'd sensed the shift already. She and Hannah had started noticing my absence, noticing how little I responded, how I'd stopped trying to keep the thread intact when they let go of the needle. Still, I said yes, not because I owed her anything, but because I was ready. The restaurant was a trendy little spot downtown, organic, minimalist, all white walls and avocado toast. I arrived a few minutes early, wearing a light gray shawl and a string of pearls I hadn't worn in years. Not for them, for me, for the woman who'd slowly rebuilt herself from grief and silence. Nicole walked in 5 minutes late, wearing a smart jacket and sunglasses she didn't take off until she sat down. "Hey, Mom," she said, smiling briefly. "Nicole," I said. We ordered. She made small talk about work, renovations, how Hannah was preparing for college. I nodded and listened, but I didn't rush to fill silences. I didn't feed the conversation like I used to. She eventually paused, stirred her iced tea, and leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her tone dipping into something more measured. "Of course." "Did something happen? With you and Hannah? You've been distant." I placed my hands gently on the edge of the table. "I think I've just stopped pretending I'm okay with being forgotten." She blinked, caught off guard. "Forgotten?" I nodded. "You might not have noticed, Nicole, but I've spent the last few years slowly becoming invisible in your lives. At first I excused it, blamed myself, but after everything I realized something. I was holding on to a family that wasn't holding me back." She sat up straighter. "Wait, Mom, that's not fair." "No," I said calmly. "What's not fair is spending holidays alone while watching you post about your quiet time. What's not fair is hearing my granddaughter call my food disgusting and laugh while feeding it to a dog. What's not fair is loving you both so deeply and being treated like a relic." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "I didn't come here to argue," I added. "I came to give you clarity." Nicole looked around the room, suddenly aware of how public we were. She lowered her voice. "Hannah was just being a teenager. She didn't mean it." I met her eyes. "You didn't mean it when you forgot my birthday, or when you stopped inviting me, or when you dismissed my silence as moodiness. It wasn't one moment, Nicole. It was the accumulation. And I've already spent too many years hoping you'd notice." She was quiet for a moment, the weight of my words slowly settling. "I just thought you'd always be there," she said, softer now. "You always were." I gave a small, sad smile. "That's the thing. People like me, we stay too long, give too much. We're taught that love means enduring. But love without respect isn't love. It's servitude." Nicole's face changed, a flash of shame, of something sinking in. And then came the question I knew she'd ask. "So, you changed your will?" There it was, not "how are you," not "can we fix this?" Just straight to what mattered most in her world. "I did," I said without flinching, "and I'm at peace with it." She stared at me. "To who?" "To people who didn't treat me like a burden." That silence, that moment, was the real confrontation. Not raised voices, not tears, just the clarity of someone who'd finally stepped out of the shadows of their own life. She nodded slowly, almost respectfully. "Okay." We finished the meal. She didn't try to pretend everything was fine, and I didn't soften the edges of what I'd said. When the bill came, she offered to pay. I let her, not because I needed her money, but because I had already paid more than enough. We stood outside, the breeze tugging at the edge of my shawl. Nicole hugged me briefly. I returned it, not stiffly, but not the way I used to. There was no ache, no desperation to feel needed again. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to anymore. It happened 6 months later. Unexpected, like most reckonings are. The kind that doesn't come thundering through the front door, but slides quietly under it, changing everything. I was sitting in my armchair one rainy afternoon, reading a book and sipping tea when I got a phone call from my lawyer's office. I nearly let it go to voicemail. I wasn't expecting anything urgent. But something told me to answer. "Mrs. Tate," his assistant began, "I wanted to confirm that the documents were delivered to the family, as per your request. Certified mail was received and signed by your daughter yesterday." I blinked. "What documents?" There was a pause. "The final copies of your amended will. You had asked that the family receive a formal copy before the end of the year, with full disclosure." My heart skipped, then steadied. That's right. I had signed off on it weeks ago, in a haze of closure and quiet certainty, and nearly forgotten the timing of its delivery. "Oh, yes. Thank you for confirming," I said, voice calm. But I knew, even before I hung up the phone, that I had just set something in motion. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. Nicole. I didn't answer. The call was followed by 3 texts, none of which I opened right away. I let them sit on the screen like unwelcome guests at the door. An hour later, she called again, then again. By the 5th attempt, I picked up. Her voice came through tight and cracking. "You're cutting us out completely?" "I'm honoring the life I've built," I said evenly, "and the people who value it." She scoffed. "We're your family." "Family is more than blood," I replied. "It's care, it's effort, it's showing up." There was a beat of silence. "And Hannah?" she said. "You're leaving her nothing?" I paused. I left her memories, ones she chose to discard. Her voice shifted from wounded to angry. "So that's it? You're giving everything to strangers?" "Not strangers," I said. "People who were present when I needed someone." She hung up. It should have stung, but instead I felt an immense calm, like I'd finally stopped waiting for someone to recognize my worth and just claimed it myself. Over the next week, I heard from mutual acquaintances. Barbara, the librarian, even a cousin I hadn't seen in years. Apparently, Nicole had told them I'd lost my mind, that I was disoriented and being manipulated. But they knew better. They'd seen me walking straighter, laughing more, volunteering, hosting tea in the garden. I wasn't unraveling. I was rebuilding. The final moment of justice came in a form I didn't expect. Hannah showed up. It was a cold Saturday afternoon. I was pruning the small flower bed by my porch when I heard a car pull into the drive. I looked up and there she was, standing awkwardly by the mailbox in a puffy coat, her face half hidden by a scarf. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. "Hi," she said softly. I stood and brushed soil from my gloves. "Hello, Hannah." She hesitated. "Can I come in?" I looked at her. Not with malice, not with warmth either, just clarity. "If you're here to talk, we can do it out here." She blinked, caught off guard, but nodded. We sat on the porch, silence between us thicker than the wind. "I got your lawyer's letter," she said. "Mom's upset." "I'm sure she is." She stared at her hands. I didn't know it hurt you that much. The pie. The things I said." "You didn't want to know," I said gently. "You made me a joke to your friends. You called love disgusting. You made me feel small in a house I used to feel safe in." Her eyes filled with tears. I was stupid. "Yes," I said, without cruelty. "But now I've made decisions and I'm standing by them." She swallowed hard. "So I don't get anything?" I looked out at the garden. "You got the best parts of me for 17 years. My time, my stories, my unconditional love. What you do with that is up to you." She stood slowly. "Okay." There was no hug, no grand reconciliation, but as she walked away, shoulders hunched against the cold, I felt something shift. Not revenge, not triumph, just balance. A story corrected, a heart protected, and peace. Finally, truly mine. She didn't call, didn't write. But that wasn't what struck me. What stayed with me was how different she looked that day. Not older, but heavier in spirit. Like someone who had tasted consequence for the first time and didn't yet know what to do with it. Still, I didn't reach out. I let the silence stay. It was no longer a wound. It was a boundary. Then, one late afternoon in early spring, the doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for a batch of hand pies. It had been years since I made them. Little peach-filled pockets that Raymond used to love with coffee. The scent of cinnamon and browned butter warmed the house, and for once I felt no ache attached to the act of baking. When I opened the door, I found Hannah standing there, holding something behind her back. "Hi," she said timidly. I nodded. "Hello." She pulled her hand forward. A small planter. Inside it, a single rosemary sprig, the same herb I had growing on my kitchen windowsill. "I remembered you had one. Thought you might like another," she said. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't grand, but it was something. A start. "Thank you," I said, stepping aside. "You can come in if you'd like." She hesitated, then walked inside slower than she used to, like the air itself required more of her. The house looked different now. There were fewer family pictures and more of me, my garden, my book club friends, photos from the library's annual fundraiser, a framed letter from a child I helped learn to read. She glanced at them quietly, taking it all in. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured her tea. She stared at the cup for a moment before speaking. "I know I messed up," she said. "I didn't understand how much I hurt you." I nodded but didn't interrupt. "I've been thinking about it a lot," she continued. "About everything. About how I just took and you kept giving. And I thought that was normal, like I assumed you'd always be there, that you didn't need anything back." She looked up. "But you did, and I didn't give it." I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "I didn't expect much, Hannah. Just kindness, just effort. Love doesn't require grand gestures, but it does ask to be seen." She wiped at her cheek. "I see you now." And I believed her. But I also knew that seeing wasn't the same as changing. Recognition was the first step. Consistency would have to follow. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I've let go of that. But I've also let go of the role I used to play. The one where I give everything and ask for nothing." She nodded. "I understand." We sat in silence for a moment. The kitchen smelled like sugar and warm fruit. The ticking clock sounded softer than usual. "I heard you're leaving the house to Barbara," she said gently. "I am." "She's lucky." "She showed up," I said simply. "Sometimes that's everything." There was no defense, no argument, just a slow, quiet acceptance. "I won't ask you to change anything," Hannah said, her voice steady now. "But I hope maybe I can earn some space in your life again. Not because of what you used to be, but who you are now." That line, "who you are now," landed somewhere deep. It was the first time I felt like she truly saw me, not as her history, but as a whole person in the present. I smiled, small but real. "Well," I said, "there are hand pies cooling on the stove." Her eyes lit up, and for a moment she looked like that little girl again, the one who used to tug at my apron strings and beg for the first one out of the oven. We didn't talk much after that. We ate in quiet, companionable rhythm. When she left, she hugged me. Not tightly, not tearfully, just long enough to say, "I'm here, if you'll let me be." And as the door clicked shut behind her, I stood in the hallway with the rosemary pot in my hand. It would go on the windowsill, next to the first one. Not because I had forgiven everything. Not because the past had been rewritten, but because sometimes a second sprig is worth planting. Not to replace what was lost, but to grow beside it, if it survives. Some roots still take, even after a long winter. Late spring sunlight poured in through the windows, warming the tiled floor and making the glass of the cabinets glow like amber. Outside, birds chirped in the distance, and the rosemary plant sat tall and green on the sill, now joined by its younger sibling, the one Hannah brought weeks ago. They stood side by side, a little mismatched, a little uneven, but both alive. I moved around the kitchen without hurry. No expectations, no guests to impress. Just me rolling out dough for a pie. Not pear and almond this time, but strawberry rhubarb. A new recipe, a new flavor. Something that felt like a quiet turning of the page. This was the life I had rebuilt. No, not rebuilt, rediscovered. A life that was no longer defined by who needed me, but by what nourished me. A life where I didn't wait on the edge of other people's convenience to feel seen. A life where love wasn't earned through sacrifice, but shared through choice. After the confrontation with Nicole and the cautious re-entry of Hannah, the dust had settled. Not everything was perfect. Nicole still hadn't apologized, not truly. But her texts came more often now, brief, careful, but polite. She was learning how to speak to me again. Or maybe learning how to approach someone she no longer had control over. Hannah had visited twice since her first return. She didn't come bearing grand declarations, but she came. Once she brought lemon cookies she had baked herself. "They're a little burnt," she admitted, but I tried. We ate them together on the porch. The cookies were dry. The moment wasn't, but this final reflection isn't about them. It's about me. I'd spent most of my life giving, believing that to be a form of love. And maybe it was, for a time. But there's a difference between generosity and self-erasure, between being a caregiver and becoming invisible. I had blurred those lines for far too long. Now I knew better. Now I knew that love doesn't require disappearing, that loyalty without reciprocation isn't noble, it's draining, and that forgiveness is a gift best given when it doesn't cost you your peace. I stepped out onto the porch with a warm slice of pie and my tea. The bench was still painted white, though the edges were chipped from years of weather. I sat tucked a throw around my shoulders and let the sweetness of the pie settle on my tongue. Not perfect, a little too tart, but it was mine. Every bite, every choice, every bit of care that went into it was for no one but me. Across the street, Barbara waved from her garden. Her grandsons were helping her pull weeds, laughing and tossing clumps of dirt into buckets. I smiled and waved back. She had become my family in many ways, not by blood, but by presence, by truth, by kindness. In the end, that counted more. The wind rustled the trees above me, and I closed my eyes for a moment. Raymond would have loved this. Not just the pie or the peace, but the version of me sitting here. Not broken, not waiting, whole. For a long time, I'd thought my story had ended in silence, that the chapter after betrayal was just loneliness. But I was wrong. There was another chapter, a softer one where healing didn't come with fireworks, but with quiet evenings and honest boundaries, where justice wasn't about revenge, but restoration, where the most powerful thing I could do wasn't to shout, but to live fully, without apology, without explanation, with grace. I finished the last bite of pie and placed the empty plate beside me. The rosemary beside the window swayed gently in the breeze. I thought of everything I'd lost, then everything I'd found, and for the first time in a long while, the two felt like part of the same journey. Not enemies, but necessary companions. Not all stories end in reunion, but some end in return to yourself. And that, I had learned, was the best ending of all.